"She's out!" My son Michael laughed as the lawyer finished reading the first page of my late husband's will. The sound cut through me like glass. There I sat, 73 years old, watching my own child celebrate what he thought was my financial ruin. His wife Sarah smirked beside him, already calculating dollar signs. My daughter Lisa nodded approvingly, her arms crossed tight. They all thought they'd finally gotten rid of the burden I'd apparently become. The lawyer's office felt cold that Tuesday morning. Rain drummed against the windows while I sat in the corner chair, the same spot I'd chosen when Robert and I first wrote our wills 20 years ago. Back then, we never imagined our children would grow into strangers. Back then, family meant something different. I'm Eleanor, and I've been a widow for 2 years now. Robert and I raised 3 children together, worked 2 jobs each to give them everything we never had. We saved every penny, sacrificed every luxury so they could have college educations and good starts in life. We thought we were building a legacy of love. We were wrong. "Mom won't be a problem anymore," Michael whispered to Sarah, not bothering to lower his voice. The lawyer cleared his throat uncomfortably. Even this stranger could sense the cruelty in the room. But here's what my children didn't know as they sat there grinning. The will had 8 pages, not 1. And before I tell you what happened, when the lawyer turned to page 2, tell me in the comments below, have you ever felt completely invisible to your own family? Because that's exactly how I'd been feeling for months before Robert died. The months leading up to this moment had been the loneliest of my life. After Robert's funeral, the house felt enormous and empty. I'd call Michael, hoping he might visit or invite me for dinner. "We're too busy right now, Mom. Maybe next week." Next week never came. I'd try Lisa. "I can't deal with your depression right now, Mom. It's too much for me." Sarah would answer Michael's phone sometimes, her voice sweet as poison. "Oh, Eleanor, Michael's not available, you know how it is." I knew exactly how it was. I'd become inconvenient, a reminder of aging and death they didn't want around their young families. The grandmother who asked too many questions, wanted too many visits, needed too much attention. They were all waiting for me to either disappear or at least stop bothering them. So when Robert had his heart attack last spring, I wasn't surprised that they showed up at the hospital with questions about life insurance and property deeds rather than concern for their father. Michael actually asked me about the house while Robert was still on life support. "Dad always said he'd take care of us, Mom. You won't need all that space by yourself anyway." The funeral planning revealed their true colors completely. They wanted the cheapest casket, the shortest service, the smallest reception. "Dad wouldn't want us to waste money," Lisa said, though she'd just bought a new BMW the month before. Sarah kept checking her phone during the viewing, sighing loudly whenever elderly neighbors wanted to share memories of Robert. I signed every paper they put in front of me. Funeral arrangements, insurance claims, bank account transfers. I was grieving, exhausted, and frankly too heartbroken to fight. They made me feel guilty for every decision, questioned every expense, treated me like I was already incompetent. "Maybe Mom should move somewhere smaller," they'd whisper when they thought I couldn't hear. "Somewhere with help available." The house Robert and I bought 40 years ago, where we raised them, where every room held memories of birthday parties and Christmas mornings and scraped knees getting bandaged in the kitchen. They saw it as dollar signs, nothing more. They saw me as an obstacle to their inheritance, an inconvenience taking up space in what they already considered their property. Standing at Robert's graveside, watching dirt fall onto his casket, I made a silent promise to my husband. I would not let them erase everything we'd built together. I would not disappear quietly into some nursing home so they could divide up our life's work. Robert had been smarter than any of us realized. He'd seen this coming long before I did. The lawyer, Mr. Peterson, had called me the week after the funeral. "Mrs. Hartford, your husband left very specific instructions about the will reading. He wanted all the children present, and he wanted me to read it exactly as written, page by page. No summaries, no explanations until the end." I'd agreed, though something in his voice made me curious. Robert had always been thorough, but this seemed unusual even for him. Now, sitting in this cold office listening to my children celebrate what they thought was my exile, I was beginning to understand my husband's wisdom. Michael was actually rubbing his hands together. Sarah had pulled out her phone to text someone, probably about their windfall. Lisa looked satisfied in a way that made my stomach turn. They thought page 1 was the entire story. They thought Robert had left everything to them and cut me out completely, just like they'd been hoping. The lawyer looked at me over his glasses. Something passed between us. An understanding, maybe even sympathy. He'd read this will before, of course. He knew what was coming on the remaining 7 pages. He knew my children were about to learn exactly what their father thought of their behavior these past 2 years. "Should I continue with page 2?" Mr. Peterson asked quietly. "Before we proceed," Mr. Peterson said, adjusting his glasses, "I need to read you something your husband wrote as a preamble to the will itself." He cleared his throat and began reading in Robert's own words. The room went quiet. Even Sarah put down her phone. "To my children, Michael, Lisa, and David, if you're hearing this, I'm gone, and you're probably wondering what took me so long." The lawyer paused. "I've watched how you've treated your mother these past 2 years, and I want you to know that every conversation was reported back to me. Every declined invitation, every excuse, every cruel dismissal." Michael's face went pale. Lisa shifted uncomfortably. Sarah looked confused, like she was trying to remember specific conversations. But I was remembering everything. The beginning of their coldness hadn't started with Robert's illness. It started 3 years ago, when we'd first mentioned maybe needing help around the house someday. Robert had slipped on ice that winter. Nothing serious, but it scared us both. We were getting older, and our big house was becoming harder to maintain. Maybe we should think about downsizing, Robert had suggested one Sunday dinner. Not immediately, but eventually. Start planning. The reaction was instant and telling. Michael immediately perked up. "You mean sell the house? Where would you go?" But his tone wasn't concerned. It was calculating. Lisa jumped right to logistics. "Have you gotten it appraised recently? The market's really good right now." Only David, our youngest, asked the right question. "Are you two okay? Is something wrong?" That should have been our first warning. 2 of our 3 children heard possible future inheritance before they heard parents might need help. But we ignored it. We made excuses for them. They were busy with their own lives, their own families. It was natural, we told ourselves. The lawyer continued reading Robert's words. I thought maybe I was being too harsh in my judgment. Maybe they were just going through difficult phases. So I decided to test my theory. I remembered that test, though I hadn't understood it at the time. Robert started asking for small favors. Could Michael help move some boxes in the attic? Could Lisa take me to a doctor's appointment when Robert couldn't drive due to a minor eye procedure? Could anyone just visit more often? Maybe bring the grandchildren around? The responses were always the same. Too busy. Maybe next week. Can't you hire someone for that? Mom, you're being too needy. Then Robert had what we thought was his first heart episode, 18 months before he actually died. It turned out to be severe heartburn, but we didn't know that when I called the children in a panic at midnight. Michael arrived 2 hours later, annoyed. Mom, you could have called an ambulance if it was really serious. Sarah and I have jobs tomorrow. Lisa came the next morning with questions about our medical directives and power of attorney papers. Have you two updated your wills recently? You should really be more prepared for situations like this. David flew in from Seattle the same day, took a week off work, and stayed until we were both feeling better. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Your brother David gets a copy of this will too, Mr. Peterson continued reading. But he's deployed overseas and couldn't be here today. He'll receive his inheritance through separate arrangements as outlined on page 7. Michael's jaw dropped. They'd forgotten about David entirely in their calculations. Sarah actually gasped. But I was still thinking about Robert's test period, how he'd started keeping a little notebook after that false alarm, writing down every phone call that wasn't returned, every invitation that was declined, every grandchild's birthday that passed without acknowledgement from Michael and Lisa. Every time I'd hang up the phone, looking defeated after being brushed off again. Eleanor doesn't ask for much, Robert had said to Michael during one of our last family dinners together. She just wants to feel like she still matters to her children. Michael had rolled his eyes. Dad, she calls every day. It's exhausting. We can't drop everything every time she wants to chat. Every day was an exaggeration. I called maybe twice a week, and usually only when something reminded me of them or their children. A recipe Lisa used to love, a news story from Michael's college town, a funny thing their father had said, normal grandparent, parent things. But somehow, staying connected with my own family had become a burden to them. The lawyer looked up from the preamble. Your husband was very thorough in documenting everything. He has specific examples listed here, with dates. He flipped through several pages. Should I read those aloud, or shall we move to the actual will distributions? Sarah grabbed Michael's arm. Lisa looked like she wanted to disappear. They were starting to realize that Robert hadn't just been the quiet, distracted man they'd thought. He'd been watching. He'd been taking notes. And apparently, he'd been planning. I thought about Robert in his final weeks, how he'd spent so much time in his office, door closed, working on paperwork. I'd assumed he was organizing financial documents, making sure everything would be simple for me to handle after he was gone. He was doing that, but he was also crafting something much more complex. A final lesson for children who'd stopped learning how to love. The rain outside was getting heavier. The sound filled the awkward silence as my children processed the fact that their father had been far more aware of their behavior than they'd ever imagined. Robert had always been a quiet observer, but they'd mistaken his silence for ignorance. They were about to discover just how clearly he'd been seeing everything. Page 2, Mr. Peterson announced, contains the actual property distributions. The house at 42 Maple Street, Mr. Peterson read from page 2, including all contents, furnishings, and the adjoining 2 acres, goes entirely to my wife, Eleanor Hartford, for her use and disposal as she sees fit during her natural lifetime. The silence was deafening. Michael's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Sarah's face went bright red. Lisa actually stood up from her chair. That can't be right, Michael said, his voice cracking. Dad always said the house would stay in the family. He promised it would be ours someday. Please let me finish, the lawyer said calmly. Upon Eleanor's death, the property will transfer according to provisions outlined on pages 6 and 7 based on criteria established by your father. What criteria? Lisa demanded. What does that even mean? I sat perfectly still, watching my children's faces transform from smug satisfaction to panic. The house they'd been mentally redecorating, the property they'd already discussed selling and splitting 3 ways, it was still mine, at least for now. There's more, Mr. Peterson continued. The investment accounts, totaling approximately $460,000, are also designated for Eleanor's management and use. Sarah made a choking sound. Michael gripped the arms of his chair so hard his knuckles went white. This is insane, Lisa said, pacing behind her chair. Mom doesn't know anything about managing investments. She'll lose everything. Dad wouldn't do this to us. But Robert had done exactly this. And sitting there, watching my children's greedy desperation unfold, I was beginning to understand why. I need to object to this, Michael said, leaning forward aggressively. My father wasn't in his right mind toward the end. This should be contested. Your father was mentally competent when he wrote this, Mr. Peterson replied smoothly. I have medical documentation to that effect. He specifically anticipated this reaction and prepared accordingly. The room felt like a pressure cooker. Sarah was whispering furiously in Michael's ear. Lisa was shaking her head repeatedly, muttering under her breath. They were falling apart in real time, and I was watching it happen with a strange mixture of sadness and satisfaction. Mom, Michael turned to me, his voice suddenly sweet in that fake way I'd learned to recognize. You don't really want all this responsibility, do you? Managing property? Dealing with investments? We could help you. We could take some of the burden off your shoulders. There it was. The manipulation I'd been subjected to for months after Robert's death. The gentle suggestions that I was too old, too confused, too emotional to handle my own life. The loving concern that was really about their convenience and their inheritance. I think I can manage, I said quietly. It was the first time I'd spoken since the reading began. Sarah jumped in immediately. Eleanor, honey, we're just worried about you, living alone in that big house trying to handle all those financial decisions. What if something happens to you? What if you fall down those stairs? What if you make a mistake with the money? The concern was so obviously fake it was almost insulting. These were the same people who hadn't visited me in months, who'd ignored every invitation, who'd made me feel like a nuisance for wanting basic contact with my own family. We could set up a nice little apartment for you, Lisa added, tag-teaming with Sarah. Somewhere safe and easy to maintain. You'd have so much less stress, Mom. And we could handle all the complicated financial stuff. It would be better for everyone. Everyone meaning them. They wanted me tucked away somewhere small and manageable while they took control of everything Robert and I had worked 40 years to build. The will continues, Mr. Peterson interrupted, saving me from having to respond to their sudden outbreak of false concern. There are specific provisions regarding family relationships and ongoing contact requirements. Requirements? Michael's voice went sharp again. The fake sweetness disappeared instantly. What kind of requirements? I remembered Robert talking about accountability in his final weeks. How people should face consequences for their choices. How respect should be earned, not assumed. How family meant more than just shared DNA. It meant showing up, caring, being present in good times and bad. Your father established very clear expectations, the lawyer explained. Page 3 outlines specific monthly contact minimums, visit requirements, and holiday inclusion standards that must be met for inheritance provisions to remain active. Lisa laughed bitterly. He's controlling us from the grave, making us jump through hoops like trained dogs. No, I said, finding my voice again. He's asking you to act like family, something you stopped doing years ago. The truth hung in the air like smoke. Michael's face flushed red. Sarah looked away. Lisa kept shaking her head in denial. We've been busy, Mom, Michael said defensively. You know we love you. We've just had a lot going on. Too busy for a phone call. Too busy for Sunday dinner. Too busy for their father's last Christmas, when he'd specifically asked everyone to come and they'd all found reasons to celebrate elsewhere. Too busy to visit me during the long, lonely months after his funeral, when grief was eating me alive. But somehow, they weren't too busy to show up today to collect their inheritance. Your father documented everything, Mr. Peterson said, consulting his papers. Every declined invitation, every missed holiday, every unreturned phone call. He has a comprehensive record spanning the past 24 months. The documentation again. Robert's quiet notebooks. His careful attention to patterns they thought he hadn't noticed. My husband had been building a case against our own children, and they'd provided all the evidence he needed. This is blackmail, Sarah said suddenly. Emotional blackmail, using money to force relationships. It's sick. It's justice, I replied, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. You treated us like we were already dead. Now you want the rewards of being loving children without ever actually being loving children. The room went dead quiet. Outside, the rain kept falling, but inside, everything had shifted. My children were seeing me differently now, not as the weak, grieving widow they could manipulate and dismiss, but as someone who might actually have power, someone who might actually fight back. And for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't sure I wanted to make this easy for them. Let me read you page 3, Mr. Peterson said, flipping to the next section. Your father titled this section, Terms of Ongoing Family Engagement. Michael was already shaking his head before the lawyer even started reading. To maintain eligibility for inheritance provisions, each adult child must demonstrate consistent family participation through the following minimum standards. 1 meaningful visit per month of at least 2 hours duration. 1 family dinner per month at Eleanor's home or a mutually agreed location. Attendance at all major holidays unless prevented by documented emergency. Weekly phone contact initiated by the child, not the parent. Sarah laughed sarcastically. This is ridiculous. We're adults, not children who need to be grounded. There's more, the lawyer continued. Failure to meet these requirements for any 3-month period will result in automatic reduction of inheritance by 25%. Failure for 6 consecutive months results in complete forfeiture of all inheritance rights, with those funds redistributing to compliant family members or designated charities. The color drained from Lisa's face. He can't do this. There have to be laws against this kind of manipulation. But there weren't, and they knew it. Robert had every right to leave his money however he wanted, and he'd chosen to leave it with conditions that required his children to act like they actually cared about their mother. When did Dad become so vindictive? Michael asked, but his voice was shaky now. He was calculating in his head, trying to figure out how much money was at stake. He became protective, I said quietly. He watched you all abandon me, and he decided to do something about it. The truth was, I hadn't known Robert was planning any of this. In his final months, when he'd spend long hours in his office working on paperwork, I'd assumed he was just trying to make things easier for me, organizing bills, updating insurance policies, making sure I'd be financially secure. I never imagined he was crafting an elaborate system to force our children back into our lives. "Mom, you can't possibly agree with this," Lisa said, turning to me with desperate eyes. "This isn't how family relationships work. You can't buy love and attention." "No, you can't," I agreed. "But apparently, you can lose an inheritance by refusing to give love and attention." Michael stood up abruptly, starting to pace. "This is insane. We have our own lives, our own families. We can't just drop everything to dance attendance on Mom every week like we're teenagers living at home." "Nobody's asking you to drop everything," I said, feeling anger rise in my chest. "Your father asked for basic human decency, a phone call, a visit, showing up for Christmas. Things that used to be normal family behavior before you all decided I was too much trouble." "That's not fair," Sarah protested. "You don't understand the pressure we're under. Michael's job requires travel. Lisa has 3 kids in different activities. I'm working full-time and trying to manage a household. We can't just—" "Stop," I interrupted, surprising everyone, including myself. "Just stop. You have time for everything that matters to you. You have time for Sarah's book club and Michael's golf league and Lisa's yoga classes. You have time for your friends and your hobbies and your social lives. You just don't have time for me." The silence that followed was crushing, because it was true, and we all knew it. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat gently. "There are additional provisions on page 4 regarding grandchildren relationships and holiday scheduling that your father hoped would encourage more family unity." "Grandchildren?" Lisa's voice cracked. "He's involving the grandchildren in this?" I thought about my 6 grandchildren, ages 4 to 16. How I barely knew them anymore because visits were so rare and always rushed. How they'd grown distant and uncomfortable around me because their parents treated me like an obligation rather than family. How Christmas last year had been the first one in 40 years that I'd spent alone because everyone had other plans they couldn't change. Robert had adored those grandchildren. He'd built them a treehouse, taught them to fish, told them bedtime stories during sleepovers that became increasingly rare as they got older. In his final year, he'd ask about them constantly. When would they visit again? Could we invite them for a weekend? Why didn't their parents bring them around anymore? "Your father wanted his grandchildren to know their grandmother," Mr. Peterson explained. "He established a trust fund for their college educations, contingent on regular family interaction and relationship maintenance." Michael slammed his hand on the table. "Now he's holding the kids' college funds hostage? This is beyond manipulative. It's financial abuse." "No," I said, standing up for the first time since the reading began. "Financial abuse is what you 3 were planning to do to me. Convince me I was incompetent, get me to sign over power of attorney, stick me in some managed care facility while you sold everything your father and I worked our entire lives to build." The room went dead silent. I'd said the thing we all knew, but nobody had acknowledged out loud. Their plan had been so obvious, so calculated. They'd just been waiting for the right moment to implement it. "Mom, that's not—" Michael started. "Don't lie to me anymore." I cut him off. "I heard the conversations. I saw the brochures Lisa left on my kitchen counter about active senior communities. I know about the phone calls to elder care attorneys that Sarah made from my own landline while I was supposedly napping." Lisa's face went white. Sarah actually backed away from me. Michael looked like he'd been slapped. They hadn't been as sneaky as they'd thought. They hadn't been as quiet as they'd assumed. And they certainly hadn't been as caring as they'd pretended to be. "Your father knew," I continued, my voice getting stronger. "He knew about all of it. The research, the planning, the conversations about what to do with the mom problem. That's why this will exist. That's why you're sitting here looking like your world just collapsed. Because it did." The lawyer was watching this family implosion with professional calm, but I could see sympathy in his eyes. He'd probably witnessed this scenario before. Adult children who'd mentally spent their inheritance before their parents were even gone, suddenly discovering that love and money were more connected than they'd realized. Outside, thunder was starting to mix with the rain. The storm was getting worse, just like the situation in this office. and we still had 4 more pages of Robert's will to get through. My children were about to learn that their father's planning had been even more thorough than they'd feared. "Pages 4 and 5, Mr. Peterson said, his voice cutting through the tension, "contain what your father called the evidence portfolio." He opened a thick folder I hadn't noticed before. Inside were dozens of papers, printouts, and what looked like handwritten notes in Robert's careful script. Your father documented every interaction for the past 24 months. Phone records showing unreturned calls, screenshots of text messages, even recordings of some conversations. My heart stopped. Recordings? Your husband had a small digital recorder, the lawyer explained to me gently. He used it to document medical appointments initially, after his first heart scare. But then he started using it for family interactions, particularly when he felt conversations were being misrepresented later. Michael went pale. "That's illegal. You can't record people without their permission. In this state, only one party needs to consent to recording," Mr. Peterson replied calmly. "Your father was well within his legal rights, and frankly, given some of the content, I understand why he felt documentation was necessary." The lawyer pulled out a transcript. "This is from a conversation between Michael and Sarah, recorded in your parents' kitchen while your father was supposedly sleeping upstairs. Would you like me to read it?" "No," Michael said quickly. Too quickly, but I needed to hear it. "Yes, read it." Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. "Sarah, we need to do something about this situation soon. She's getting more clingy every week, and honestly, it's affecting our marriage. I can't handle her calling all the time." "Michael, I know. And Dad's not going to live forever. When he's gone, she'll be completely our responsibility. We need to start preparing her for the reality that she can't stay in that house alone." The words hit me like physical blows. Sarah continued in the transcript. "My friend Jenny went through this with her mother-in-law. They found a really nice place, very clean, good activities. The woman actually thanked them later for making the hard decision for her. This was recorded 6 months before your father died," Mr. Peterson noted, "while he was still very much alive and aware." I remembered that day. Robert had come downstairs looking pale and shaken. I'd assumed he was feeling sick again, but he'd been listening to his own children plan his wife's exile while he was still breathing. "There are more recordings," the lawyer continued. "Lisa discussing property values with a realtor. Sarah researching power of attorney laws. Multiple conversations about my mother's alleged mental decline and increasing confusion, none of which was medically documented or factually accurate. Lisa was crying now. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic, of someone caught in their own web of lies." The lawyer pulled out another document. "This is perhaps the most telling piece of evidence. A group text chain between all 3 children that your father obtained through, let's say, technical means." He handed me the printout. My hands shook as I read their words. "Michael, Dad's getting worse. Might be time to have the conversation with Mom about next steps. Lisa, I looked at 3 facilities yesterday. The one in Riverside is nice but expensive. Mom would probably fight it. Sarah, maybe we don't give her a choice. POA exists for a reason. David, what are you people talking about? Dad had a cold, not a stroke, and Mom is sharper than all of us put together." "Michael, David, you're not here dealing with the daily reality. They're both declining faster than you know. David, have any of you actually spent time with them lately? Because I was there last month and they seemed fine. Lisa, you don't understand. Mom calls me crying about Dad's health constantly. She's falling apart." The lies took my breath away. I had called Lisa exactly twice about Robert's health, both times when he'd had actual medical emergencies. And I certainly hadn't been falling apart. I'd been trying to hold our family together while they systematically dismantled it. But David had seen through their manipulation. David had defended us. David had questioned their narrative when the others just went along with it. "Your brother," Mr. Peterson said to Michael and Lisa, "refused to participate in these conversations. In fact, he sent several messages asking his siblings to be more supportive and involved, rather than planning interventions that weren't needed." I kept reading the text chain. David's words stood out like beacons of sanity among his siblings' callousness. David, Instead of planning Mom's future without asking her, maybe we should actually visit and see how she's really doing. Sarah, easy for you to say from Seattle. You don't have to deal with the constant neediness. David, she's not needy. She's lonely. There's a difference. Michael, same result though. We can't drop our lives every time she wants attention. David, it's called being a family, Mike. Maybe try it sometime. That last message had ended the group chat. No one had responded to David's challenge. They'd just gone quiet and continued their planning in smaller, more secretive groups. Your father received copies of these messages from David, who was concerned about the tone and content. Mr. Eddie Peterson explained. David felt his parents should know what was being discussed behind their backs. So David had been trying to protect us. David had been the whistleblower, the one honest voice among his siblings. And Robert had been building his case, document by document, lie by lie, preparing for exactly this moment. There's one more recording I need to play, the lawyer said, pulling out a small device. This was made 3 weeks before your father's death, during what turned out to be your final family gathering. He pressed play. Robert's weak voice filled the room. I know I'm dying. I want my family around me these last few weeks. Can you manage that? Michael's voice, impatient. Dad, don't be so dramatic. You're fine. The doctors said this round of treatment might actually help. I'm asking for my children to visit more often. Robert continued on the recording. Eleanor's going to need support when I'm gone. Promise me you'll take care of her. Sarah's voice. Of course we will, Robert. She'll always be family. Lisa. Dad, you're going to be around for years yet. Stop talking like this. But then came Robert's final question. When I'm gone, will you make sure Eleanor never feels alone or unwanted? The silence on the recording stretched for a full 30 seconds before Michael answered. Dad, let's not talk about depressing stuff. Mom, didn't you say dinner was ready? The recording clicked off. The silence in the lawyer's office was deafening. Robert had asked them directly for their promise to care for me, and they'd changed the subject to dinner. I looked at my children, really looked at them, and saw strangers. People who had calculated my worth, planned my future without my consent, and lied to my dying husband about caring for me. Page 6, I said quietly, contains the inheritance distributions, doesn't it, Mr. Peterson? He nodded. Would you like me to continue reading? Yes. I need to hear what Robert decided. Michael was gripping Sarah's hand so tightly I thought he might break her fingers. Lisa had stopped crying and was just staring at the table, probably running numbers in her head, calculating how much money their cruelty was going to cost them. Mr. Peterson turned to page 6. Distribution of estate assets upon Eleanor's death or incapacitation. To Michael Hartford, contingent upon meeting family engagement requirements for a minimum of 24 consecutive months. 15% of remaining estate value. 15%. Out of what they'd assumed would be 3 equal shares of 33% each. To Lisa Hartford Chen, contingent upon the same 24-month requirement, 15% of remaining estate value. Lisa's head snapped up. 15%? That's impossible. There are only 3 of us. But there weren't only 3 of them. There was David. To David Hartford, currently serving overseas, unconditional bequest. 60% of remaining estate value, plus the family cottage in Maine, plus grandfather's vintage car collection. The room erupted. 60%? Michael shouted, jumping to his feet. That's not fair. David doesn't even live here. He hasn't been taking care of you. But that was exactly the point, wasn't it? David hadn't been taking care of me because he'd treated me with respect from the beginning. He'd never assumed I needed managing or controlling. He'd simply remained my son, calling regularly, visiting when he could, treating me like a human being worthy of love rather than a problem to be solved. The remaining 10%, Mr. Peterson continued calmly, goes to the Riverside Animal Shelter in honor of Eleanor and Robert's shared love of animals. Even the family pets got more consideration than Michael and Lisa. It would have been funny if it wasn't so devastating. This will can be contested, Sarah said desperately. There are laws about this kind of thing. You can't disinherit children completely. They're not disinherited, the lawyer replied. They have clear paths to inheritance. They simply have to demonstrate basic family loyalty and affection for 24 months. Many people would consider that a bargain. I thought about those 24 months, what it would mean to have Michael and Lisa suddenly appearing at my door, calling me weekly, showing up for holidays. But not because they wanted to be there, because they had to be there to collect their money. I won't do it, Lisa said suddenly, her voice hard. I won't be blackmailed into pretending to love someone. It's degrading. The honesty was shocking. After all the lies, all the manipulation, all the false promises to Robert on his deathbed, she was finally telling the truth. She didn't love me. The money wasn't worth pretending otherwise. Lisa, Michael hissed, don't be stupid. It's 15% of probably over $1 million. You can fake caring about Mom for 2 years. Fake caring. The words hung in the air like poison gas. But I was done being someone people had to pretend to love. Mr. Peterson, I said, my voice steady for the first time all day. What happens if I choose to modify these terms? Can I change the requirements? He consulted his notes. Your husband gave you complete discretionary power over the enforcement and modification of these conditions. You can make them more stringent, less stringent, or eliminate them entirely. The choice is yours. The power shifted in the room like a physical force. My children were looking at me with something approaching fear now. Their inheritance was entirely in my hands. Their father had made me the judge and jury of their worthiness. There are also provisions, the lawyer continued, for what your husband called alternative distributions if you feel the original requirements are inappropriate given changed circumstances. Alternative distributions. Robert had anticipated that his children might react badly to his conditions. He'd given me options. What kind of alternatives? I asked. Mr. Peterson smiled slightly. Several possibilities. You could choose to donate their portions to charity immediately. You could redistribute their shares to David, or, he paused, you could implement what your husband called the nuclear option, which is complete liquidation of the estate, with all proceeds going to establish the Robert and Eleanor Hartford Foundation for Elder Care Advocacy. Your children would receive nothing, but thousands of other elderly people would benefit from programs designed to prevent family abandonment and financial abuse. The nuclear option. Leave it to Robert to plan for total family destruction if his children proved themselves completely irredeemable. Michael was shaking his head frantically. Mom, you can't seriously be considering cutting us off completely. We're your children. Blood is thicker than water. Blood might be thicker than water, I replied, but apparently it's not thicker than greed. I looked around the room at these 3 people I'd given birth to, raised, loved unconditionally for decades. They were staring at me like I was a stranger, someone they'd never really known at all. Maybe I was. I need time to think, I said finally. Mr. Peterson, how long do I have to make these decisions? There's no time limit specified. Your husband left that entirely to your discretion. Take as long as you need. I stood up, gathering my purse and coat. For the first time in 2 years, I felt powerful, in control, respected, even if it was only because I now held the purse strings. Where are you going? Sarah called after me. Home, I said simply, to the house that's apparently still mine, to think about what kind of relationships I want for the rest of my life. I paused at the door and looked back at them one final time. Your father gave you a chance to earn your inheritance by learning to love your mother. But maybe the more important question is, do I want to earn your love by bribing you with money? The answer was already forming in my mind, but they didn't need to know that yet. 3 days later, they all showed up at my door. Michael arrived first, carrying grocery bags and wearing his most apologetic smile. Mom, I brought your favorites, that coffee you like, and I got fresh flowers for the dining room table. Sarah was with him, clutching a photo album. Eleanor, I made this for you. Pictures of all the grandchildren from birth until now. I thought you might want to catch up on everything we should have shared with you. Lisa came an hour later with homemade cookies and what looked like genuine tears. Mom, I've been thinking about what you said, about earning love with money. You're right. We've been terrible children, and I want to make it up to you. I let them in because I was curious. How far would they go? How convincing could their performance be? The answer was very convincing if you didn't know better. They stayed for 4 hours. They helped me reorganize Robert's office, something I'd been putting off for months. They looked through photo albums, sharing memories I'd thought they'd forgotten. Michael fixed the squeaky kitchen cabinet he'd ignored for 2 years. Sarah actually listened when I told stories about their father's final days. For a few hours, it felt like having my family back. But then Lisa's phone rang. Her voice carried from the kitchen where she'd gone to take the call. "No, I can't meet tonight. I have to stay here longer. I know, but it's important for the next 2 years. Trust me, it'll be worth it in the end." The spell broke. They weren't here because they'd realized they loved me. They were here because 15% of over $1 million was worth a few afternoons of pretense. I walked into the kitchen where Lisa was finishing her call. "How much do you think I'm worth?" I asked quietly. She spun around, face flushing red. "Mom, that's not... I wasn't talking about... How much money do you think you'll inherit if you can fake loving me for 24 months? The silence stretched between us. Finally, she looked down at her hands. "Michael thinks around $300,000 each, after taxes." $300,000. That's what my love was worth to them. Approximately $12,500 per month of forced affection. "Thank you for being honest," I said. That evening, after they all left promising to visit again soon, I called David in Seattle. "Mom, how did the will reading go? I've been worried about you." Just hearing his voice, full of genuine concern instead of calculation, made me start crying. "Oh, sweetheart," I said. "Your father was so much smarter than any of us realized." I told him everything. The recordings, the text messages, the inheritance terms, his siblings' sudden appearance at my door with flowers and photo albums. David was quiet for a long time. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I knew they were being distant, but I didn't realize it was this calculated. When I tried to call them out on it, they just stopped including me in family discussions. Your father left you 60% of everything," I told him. "I don't want it," he said immediately. "Not if it comes from punishing Michael and Lisa. That's not who Dad was. That's not who you are either." But that's where David was wrong. It was exactly who Robert had become in his final months. A father protecting his wife from his own children's greed. "What if I told you I was considering the nuclear option?" I asked. David was quiet again. "The what?" "Donating everything to charity, leaving your siblings nothing, and starting a foundation to help other elderly people avoid what I've been going through." "Mom," David said slowly, "what do you want to do? Not what Dad wanted? Not what would punish them most? Not what would make the biggest statement? What would make you happy for the rest of your life?" It was the first time anyone had asked me that question in years. "I want to feel loved because I'm lovable," I said, "not because I'm profitable." "Then you have your answer." The next morning, I called Mr. Peterson. "I've made my decision about the inheritance modifications. What would you like me to prepare?" "The nuclear option. I want to establish the Robert and Eleanor Hartford Foundation for Elder Care Advocacy. Every penny goes to help families stay together through love, not financial coercion." "Are you certain?" "This decision is irreversible." "I'm certain, but I want to deliver the news myself." 2 hours later, I was standing in my living room facing Michael, Lisa, and Sarah. I'd called them over for what I'd described as an important family meeting. They arrived with more gifts, more smiles, more performance. "I've made my decision about your father's will," I announced without preamble. They all leaned forward eagerly. "I'm dissolving it entirely. Every dollar of your inheritance is going to charity." The silence was absolute. Michael spoke first, his voice barely a whisper. "Mom, you can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. Your father gave me the power to change his terms, and I'm exercising that power. You'll inherit nothing except the knowledge that your greed destroyed our family." Sarah started crying. Real tears this time, not the manipulative ones she'd been using for 3 days. Lisa stood up abruptly. "This is insane. You're punishing us for being human, for having complicated lives and making mistakes." "No," I said calmly. "I'm freeing myself from people who only love me when they're paid to." Michael's face was bright red. "You'll regret this. When you're old and sick and need help, don't expect us to come running." "I'm already old, Michael. And I'm already sick. Sick of being treated like a burden by my own children. This decision isn't punishment. It's liberation." They left without another word. No goodbye, no argument, no attempt to change my mind. Just 3 people walking out of my life forever, proving exactly why I'd made the right choice. I stood at my window, watching their cars disappear down the street, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt completely at peace. That was 8 months ago. The Robert and Eleanor Hartford Foundation for Eldercare Advocacy officially launched last spring. We've already helped 43 families navigate difficult conversations about aging, independence, and family responsibility. We provide counseling, mediation, and legal resources for elderly people who find themselves isolated or manipulated by their own children. It's become my life's work, and for the first time in years, I wake up every morning with purpose. David visits every few months when his military schedule allows. His children call me Grandma Eleanor and actually seem excited to talk to me when we video chat. He never mentions his siblings, and neither do I. Some wounds are better left to heal in silence. I still live in the house Robert and I built our life in. I've converted his office into a workspace for the foundation, and I've hired a wonderful young woman named Maria who helps with the day-to-day operations. She reminds me a little of myself at 30, determined, compassionate, unwilling to let people be forgotten just because they've grown old. The house doesn't feel empty anymore. It feels purposeful. Michael, Lisa, and Sarah never contacted me again after that final confrontation. I heard through mutual friends that they tried to contest the will, but Robert's documentation was too thorough, too legal, too airtight. They spent more money on attorneys than they would have received in their reduced inheritance anyway. Sometimes I wonder if they ever think about what they lost. Not the money, the relationship, the chance to know their mother as an adult, as a full person with dreams and opinions and stories worth hearing, the opportunity to model real love and respect for their own children. But mostly, I don't wonder about them at all. I've made new friends through the foundation work, people who choose to spend time with me because they enjoy my company, not because they feel obligated. We have book clubs and garden parties and holiday celebrations filled with laughter instead of tension. Last Christmas, I hosted 12 people who, like me, had been discarded by their biological families. We called ourselves the Chosen Family, and it was the most joy I'd felt during the holidays in years. David joined us by video call from his base in Germany, and his kids sang Christmas carols to a room full of honorary grandparents who applauded like they were watching a professional concert. The grandchildren I barely knew have been replaced by children who actually want to know me. I keep Robert's picture on my desk at the foundation office. Sometimes I talk to him about the cases we're handling, about the families we've helped stay together, about the elderly people we've protected from financial abuse and emotional abandonment. You were right, I tell his photograph. Sometimes love needs consequences to survive. But here's what I've learned that Robert didn't live long enough to understand. The best consequence isn't punishment. It's walking away from people who don't value you and walking toward people who do. I'm 74 now, and I've never felt more valuable, more respected, or more genuinely loved. I'm not rich in money anymore, but I'm wealthy in relationships that feed my soul instead of draining it. The foundation keeps growing. We're opening a second office next year in the neighboring county. Maria is talking about expanding our services to include support groups for grandparents who've been cut off from their grandchildren. Every day, we help people realize that family is defined by behavior, not biology. Every day, we help people choose love over obligation. And every day, I'm grateful that Robert saw clearly enough to give me the power to choose my own happiness over other people's greed. Robert's will didn't just distribute money. It revealed character. It forced everyone to show their true priorities, their real values, their genuine capacity for love without conditions. In the end, the people who loved me got to keep loving me, and the people who only loved my money lost both. I call that a perfect inheritance. If you've stayed with my story this long, thank you for listening. Thank you for understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be unloved. Thank you for seeing that dignity isn't something you can buy or sell. It's something you choose to keep or choose to give away. Like this video, subscribe, and comment if you or someone you know has faced something similar. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose ourselves when no one else will.